Have you ever felt grief or sadness as a parent, even though the child you love is right here in front of you? That's what we're exploring today, why sometimes parenting hurts and how to move forward. I'm Patrick, and this is Parenting Pivot. My guest, Dr. Randi Hirschberg, has helped countless families name these confusing feelings and find a path through them. If you've ever felt overwhelmed or guilty for grieving the child you imagined but that you did not get, this conversation will give you clarity and hope. Okay? Let's dive in. Honest stories, expert guidance, the path redefined. Parenting Pivot. Dr. Hirschberg, thank you so much for joining me. So, when parents first realize that their path is going to be different than they expected, what usually comes up for them?
I would say there's a few different common ones. Many parents go into a nervous system kind of panic response or a fight, flight, or freeze response, just adjusting to the shock. Depending on who the parents are and how they are more likely to respond to what feels like a threat at the time. Some parents might go into overdrive and get really activated and start looking into everything they can and learning everything they can about it. Other parents will feel just frozen and overwhelmed and not really able to initiate anything to start the process or move things forward. So it's usually one of those two things, and it might be different if these are married parents. There's often grief. I mean, always grief, if somebody's in touch with it, can feel like a pit in somebody's stomach or intense sadness. Any of the feelings one expects and has with normal grief. So sometimes or at times denial, sometimes regret, blame, looking to see if, looking kind of obsessively to see if there was some way that they might have caused this. And oftentimes that is part of a feeling of love and also a feeling of wanting control. So if you can find what the thing is that caused it, then it indicates some level of control in a situation that feels out of control. Not useful, but that's common too.
So getting the diagnosis meant grieving the future that we thought she'd have, right? The typical path of school and independence and friendships was going to be different than what we expected. It was heartbreaking to let go of the version of the life we'd pictured. There was a lot of guilt too, because we were wondering if we'd done something wrong. We started questioning everything, but in time we began to embrace her unique journey. And a friend of mine had shared a poem called Welcome to Holland, which was a real change in perspective for me. It helped me see the beauty in the life that we were living and not the one we'd imagined. One that would be full of milestones that are hard won and deep joy. She's an amazing child, and she works so hard for every small achievement, and every small achievement feels monumental. So it's actually a wonderful journey to go on because people take things for granted.
Other parents report feeling a lot of relief because they've known something is different about their child for a long time and maybe not had support from others who saw it. And so it can come almost as I knew something was different about my child and now there's a name for it and I can read more about what makes sense of what I can do now. The clarity that comes with that and the reassurance that the feeling, the intuition they had about their child was accurate. And there's also, I would say, often a feeling of isolation, feeling disconnected from parenting communities that parents are often in prior to that. Often kids are in normal or traditional schools with neurotypical kids. And that's where the first parenting connections are made or the parenting community is made. And parents can feel embarrassed sometimes or not really know how they can connect with parents anymore as they watch these parents' children go on a path that was more expected while they're figuring something out that's new.
Dr. Hirschberg, I know that you've actually watched every single one of the parent clips that we used for this show. Do their reactions feel familiar? Is that what you typically hear?
It was clear that the parents there are parents who are further along in the process and not parents that are just finding out this information. So they all sound like what I would expect from parents who are more along in the process, a couple of years in. Another parent talked about their hopes that their child would go to a certain school and excel at Little League, and all that came off the table. But they all were able to speak to the rewards that have come later.
What I had expected for his future was, basic. He'll do well in school. I'll put him in like Little League. He's left-handed and he has an awesome arm. So I was thinking, yeah, I'll just put him like a Little League. I'll do this. Just had a lot of plans. And one of a therapist that he had, she was excellent. She says, you have to understand he's not like all the other kids. He's not typical. He can't do what other children can do. And that's when it started to really hit me more and more. Because I took him to Little League. If you know anything about us ADHD people, we're really not the greatest at directions. Even a 4-year-old without ADHD, directions is not, it's not like one of the things we're really good at. Which made it even worse, and he just wanted to make friends with everybody. So it was really difficult. And I started to realize more and more, okay, this is going to be a little different.
I think all of them spoke, I know at least 2, and I think 3 spoke about their delight in the uniqueness of the child, their appreciation for the child, in their differences. And that often is something that comes a little bit later. Hard won.
There's a phrase I learned a few years ago. It was called ambiguous loss. And it really changed the way I thought about my own feelings. Because before that, I felt, confused and stuck and maybe even guilty. Can you explain what ambiguous loss is and how parents can let themselves both feel it and process it?
All parents, when they have a child coming into the world, do have hopes, dreams, expectations that are conscious, not conscious, where their kids will either have a similar path to them, be like them, or alternatively do the opposite of what they did. And they're carrying all this hope with them. And then along the way, we find out that's not the case. Ambiguous loss, right? It's like the loss of something that's not actually a profound loss or a death or something being gone. You still have this thing here. So it's the loss of a dream in that way.
What are some of the most common but misplaced expectations that parents have? Perhaps ones that make you say, hey, you have to let that one go.
Sometimes it's about particular schools or particular programs, like we heard at the beginning. Parents that are focused on kids having to attend certain schools, could be private schools or public schools.
When my daughter started school, like I said, she's a bright kid, and she was accepted to a really selective public school program. She had a test into it. We were, so excited to get her on board with this program. And over time, as we realized that it wasn't going to work for her because the PDA profile meant that she just wasn't going to respond to a fairly high pressure academic situation. As a young kid, we arrived at a situation where we decided, homeschooling was what was going to work for her, and that's where we are right now. Really had to come to terms with how the trajectory of her academic career and maybe even what she does as an adult is going to be different than what we imagined.
Letting that go if that's not the most supportive place for them. Could be summer camps. It could also be sports, athletics, and careers. Like parents become aware, even something like a birthday party, the way they might have envisioned birthday parties, right? Like perhaps you have a parent who had lots of big birthday parties growing up with lots of kids and they loved that and they wanted to do it again. But now they have a kid who they see becomes completely overwhelmed by that. And that's not, in fact, how they want to celebrate their birthday. Sometimes it's around speech. Parents who envision and fantasize that their kids would tell them I love you, and they don't get to hear that. If you have a kid that's nonverbal, having to that's a big grief right there, having to let go of that expectation too. What other pictures? I think sometimes families with more than one child expect that they'll be doing things together as a huge, one family. And sometimes because of the management of needs, they have to split up more frequently, or on vacations, they might not be able to take them as freely, or, travel to another country and tour the same way, like just kind of setting up things differently or scaffolding in a way that they may not have expected at all.
I'll admit it, I'm a guy, and my instinct is to always try to fix things. But I've learned that with my child, that does not always work. So how do parents hold on to hope for change, for growth, for improvement, without slipping into the fix it mindset?
That's something that can happen, especially early on in the process. I see when parents are getting this information at the very beginning, one or both sometimes trying to fix or veering towards some of the cure-based literature, or you mentioned social media earlier, but some of the groups on social media are a dangerous place to be with the fixing mindset.
Yeah.
Diets or strange non-evidence-based things. I think that I think the fixing mindset is both from messaging in the culture, current political climate not helping that situation either, and the messages around neurodiversity. So along with also what we were talking about before, it's an avoidance of grief. It's people tend to fix when they don't want to bear the feeling or the realities that might be coming in otherwise. So again, I connect this to being able to process and distill one's grief about it to effectively dodge it. And of course, by communicating verbally, non-verbally, consciously, unconsciously to the child, there's something that needs to be fixed. It's not a message that's going to help them then do their best, work hard, grow in the way that they need to. I think that there's a lot of really good neurodiverse affirming communities that exist right now, that see it not as something to be fixed, but understand that this is about difference, different brains, difference, not something that's broken. So that's an important place to orient oneself in, is finding those types of communities, finding the right books to read, finding the social media groups, if there are some that would be helpful, where one's getting their information. Trusting other parents who are a little bit ahead of them in the process and hearing their experiences and strengths, so that one begins to develop the kind of internal understanding that it's a process that can't be predicted, and that they have to trust that their child will grow at their rate. It's also paying attention to what teachers say, what therapists say, school communities. They are going to be able to see your children with expertise and a certain level of distance that parents often can't see when they're in the middle of it. So leaning on those people and trusting them. And there's a lot of diversity too within neurodifference. So exactly, finding a community of parents who have both new parents to get support from, but also experienced ones to lean on their journey with children who have similar differences. And also educating oneself, like educating yourself to really understand where the brain differences lie, looking deeply at any kind of neuropsych or psych assessments that can identify where the recommendations might be, and working backwards. A brain difference, like a birthday party example, right? Like sensory regulation and integration, right? Like it's not that your child is being difficult, that they don't want this party, or if they don't want to sit at a restaurant. It may be that there's actually brain differences that are making it more challenging. And once you can educate yourself about those and come up with compensatory strategies and more understanding, you can both normalize to yourself and your child while cheerleading them to push themselves a little bit to do hard things, but not eclipsing them with completely overwhelming expectations and inadvertently communicating that they're not good enough somehow.
Sometimes when we talk about brain differences, neurodifferences, I think that people are forgetting that they are actual physical differences too inside the brain. So I physically cannot jump 9 feet in the air. My body will not allow me to do that. How can parents reframe this, both for themselves and for others, to make it clear that these are physical challenges, not just something their kids can get over, push through, cut it out, quit it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I've had moments where I felt isolated, when even people close to us didn't seem to understand. And I'm sure a lot of other parents feel the same way. What are some healthy ways to cope when family and friends just don't seem to understand your child's differences?
what you're asking about is such a common experience, especially as you were just saying, like it's a little bit different with a child who is very obviously physically disabled in some severe way or very obviously completely nonverbal. But once you move out of those extreme realms, you have all these in betweens where family members, well-meaning friends don't understand. And sometimes they see it as either a failing on the parents' part somehow, or they put children in situations that don't feel good. One is the more parents educate themselves on knowing the specifics of what's hard and why, or knowing the specifics of the struggles around their particular child's special needs and the biology of it, they can begin to disseminate information to family members. But that only goes so far. I mean, they don't all listen. They might repeat. But still, like having helpful little blurbs to share, or sometimes if people are not understanding it, just saying something like, it's really difficult for me to explain this to you, but it's also not helpful what you're saying to me. So I'm happy to give you information if you're curious, but otherwise I'd rather just stay away from this conversation, like setting those limits, and knowing when you need to let go, knowing when you can't change somebody's minds, but also how it also reinforces the importance of the community of other parents with children who have similar differences and needs, because that's more of a safe space at times. They have a hard time, like a different parent told me a story a couple of weeks ago at work, about another child coming in and going through their drawers and taking everything out of their drawers. Yeah. And I mean, that's hard for other families who aren't used to dealing with those kinds of things. They might understand it's related to that, but it can be hard to have those kids around for them if they're not set up with the right scaffolding. So it's also finding a circle of safety and a safe community, learning what to say, having a few elevator speeches you can lean on. The people that are curious are going to be the ones that can grow with you more. People who are more open or curious or asking questions.
One of my goals in this show is not just to give parents a sense of community, but also to give them something practical that they can use. What are some tools or maybe therapies that you would recommend?
I do think therapy is enormously useful, helpful. But within that, more importantly, I think in looking for a therapist to help with this process is finding therapists that are both child therapists, so they understand well child development, special needs, neurodiverse, affirming, but also also experienced in working with adults and working with grief and working with loss. Mindfulness-based therapies are good as well. So, I think looking for those therapists or psychologists that do both. Often these children are having some types of services. And if parents ask or inquire with those therapists, more frequently than you might think, they know of another family within their practice who has a kid that's struggling with some similar challenges or differences. And oftentimes they'll actually match them up just for information and connection. Yep. So asking those people are important. And some really good books. I love the book Different, Not Less, which is written from I think she's a young adult. She's in her early 20s by the time she writes it, her own journey with getting diagnosed as someone who has autism. So, I think that those are, looking in wherever your diagnoses or what your collection of differences might look like for your child. Trying to find where the specifics are online is another good place to go if it's not therapy. And then there's also some really good therapies for some of the behaviors that come along with special needs that embody the ideas you're asking about, like both acceptance and growth. So helping parents to get into that in-between area where they're not overly accommodating child's needs, but they're not also overwhelming them with demands they can't do yet. Another thing parents have a hard time understanding, right? Like, well, how come they can sit and read a book for an hour, but the second we're in this public setting, they can't sit at all? They're on the table of the library. Right. So like therapists that can help explain, help parents understand, help two parents get connected and on the same board with their intervention, and actually also help all those treatments help parents forge a more positive relationship with their children. Part of psychology training is learning to do neuropsych assessments and learning to read them. So that specific type of training also put somebody in a position to better understand the nuances and intricacies of whatever this particular child is dealing with.
Could you share a story of a parent who found peace and maybe even some unexpected joy on this, our different journey?
Yeah, I mean, there's many, but I think one that I would say sticks out is a parent who, with this parent, her son at a very young age, I think it was starting maybe even at the 18-month appointment when there was this series of the pediatric questions. Also a parent where both she and her spouse initially went the fixing route and went into an activated mode of trying to find all the things. But now, so let's see, we're 5 years later, just thinking about what she said to me a few months ago. And this child is now in a very specialized program, still nonverbal, though they've recently realized that he can understand a lot. So they're trying to train him on other communication ways of being. But she was recently talking about how the joy that he experiences and her observation of his engagement with joy, even if it's around examining a tire on a car, is joy that she doesn't witness very often. And that despite what other parents may look at and see, they certainly don't see the way that he has allowed her to make contact with a different quality of joy and joy that she didn't know that was possible for herself and for others. And it can be infectious in the family at the very least.
Mhm.
But I also think all the parents that you interviewed talk about in this episode, talk about different points where one parent says, I don't remember specifically, but the general tone or feeling is how incredulous they are with their child and how they see how hard she works and how hard earned it is for her. And they just admire that so much for themselves too. And overall, I think the hopeful message of almost all parents that go through this process somewhere along the way do see things in a different light or find some joy and growth.
If I could tell my past self, I would just say that she's going to be okay. And she knows how hard you're fighting for her. And it matters. And she knows that she's safe. She knows that it's not her that's broken, that it's the system that's broken.
Growth in a different way than would be otherwise through going through this experience, opening their minds, meeting all types of people and parents that they may not otherwise have met, and a different level of humility and open-mindedness and understanding for others. I also know 2 psychologists that made career changes after being through these experiences.
If a parent wants to take just one small step for themselves, for their family, for their child, what would that be?
I would say figure out today, 1, go online, seek out one organization where you might find a support group, where you can find a support group of parents going through similar things. Alternatively, if you might be a more private person, go online and look for therapists that are both working with children and adults. Make 1 or 2 calls, ask about how they view neurodiversity or special needs, make sure they have an understanding of that and they're affirming. The alternative would be go online and buy a book. But I think that some of what you're talking about, like that grief or that, oh my God, everything I thought was going to happen is not going to happen. To me, that's what gets healed in relationships and connections. So that's why I go for that first.
Dr. Randi Hirschberg, thank you so much for being here and sharing your time and your wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to help.
Understanding why you feel these feelings as a parent can change everything. The way you see your child and the way you feel about yourself. A huge, huge thanks to Dr. Randi Hirschberg for helping us unpack that today. What part of this conversation resonated with you? If you share it in the comments, we can maybe answer it in a future episode. And if this episode spoke to you, please subscribe. It makes a huge difference. We're just getting started. If you've already subscribed, well then thank you. You're helping us build a place where parents don't have to go through this alone because you're not alone. We'll meet you there.